Hey everyone, it's Tim from timgagnon.com. Today I'm going to take you through this painting of lavender fields that I created a few days ago. It's an acrylic painting and I wanted to just do a short painting lesson for you today. So I'm just going to narrate as I go through this painting. I'm going to show you all the important steps and give you some color mixtures, some brush strokes that you can use to also create something similar to this. But before we get started, I just wanted to mention that I have a new membership program on my website. So if you're interested in online painting lessons, you're going to want to check that out. Not only will you learn from me, but you're going to learn from some other great artists as well. And you can get instant access to hundreds of great painting lessons right away. So make sure you check out my website, timgagnon.com. I'll have the link here in the video, as well as in the description below. Also, I'll have some information on the supplies you need to create this painting in the description below. So thanks for joining me today. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and share with your friends. So let's get started with this painting. Hey everyone, and welcome to a mini lesson here on YouTube. Today what I'm going to do is a lavender field. To start off the lesson, I'm using a filbert brush and I'm using cerulean blue and white. I'm going to keep the color palette relatively simple. Initially, what I want to do is cut out pieces of sky. So you can see here, just cutting out the cloud shapes, using it almost like negative space. So I'm painting in the sky area and creating the cloud shape. Now I want to take that cerulean blue, white, some raw umber, and a little bit of alizarin crimson to make a nice cloud gray. And what I'm going to do here is just basically fill in the entire area for my clouds. And what I'm going to do is just work the color up close to the edges. You can see I'm not overlapping the edges yet, just bringing it up close. So each time you load your brush, you might have slightly different value. You might actually accidentally get a little bit too much white in there. As long as it's close, it doesn't really matter. Just try to blend that stuff together. It doesn't have to be the exact color every time. So I'm just going to continue in working through the cloud here, filling it in. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to overlap into the sky a little bit. I'm using a filbert brush like I mentioned. You can use a round brush for this as well. And I'm dabbing the brush out into the sky. So what happens is the shape of the brush creates the contour shape of the cloud. So if you just lightly dab, you'll get a nice soft edge. Don't push too hard with the brush. Just try to overlap into the sky color just a little bit. Over here, I'm going to adjust my shape. This is a great time. If you're not happy with your overall shape of your cloud, you can adjust the shape a little bit by just taking the cloud color and pushing it up into the sky even further. Okay, and I'll try to feather that blue that I pulled down into the cloud. I'll try to mix that in with the cloud color. And you can see here, I just decided, well, I'm going to take that piece of sky out completely. I'm going to try to get the focus more on the left-hand side of the clouds. So again, this is a great time to adjust the shape of your clouds if you're not happy. You can also, if you wanted to, you can add more sky into the painting as well at this point. But I want this to have kind of a cloudy sky, some happy clouds, not angry clouds, still a cloudy sky in general with just little peaks of blue sky. Okay, I'm going to take a fan brush now, more raw umber into that cerulean blue. So we're making the same color as our cloud basically, except a little bit darker. And I'm going to point the fan brush up and create a nice hill here in the distance. So pointing the brush up creates little tips on the top of your hill, and that makes it look like it has trees off in the distance. So adding a little more cerulean blue, The more blue you add, the more atmospheric, the further away the hill will look. So it's up to you on how much blue you want in there. So as you can see here, I mixed some more blue, and I'm creating a hill that's even further away using the fan brush. So same exact thing, just this time I went a little bit more blue, so hopefully that will push the hill back and create that distance. Basically using a cooler color to create the distance and atmosphere. Try to be unique with the shape of your hill. You don't want just perfect triangles, you want to have little ups and downs all throughout the hill. Again, pointing that fan brush, making the tips point upwards to create the little tips on top of the hill. All right, I'm going to go back to my cloud color. I've got my filbert brush. You can use a round brush. We're going a little bit lighter now. So we're taking the same cloud color, but going a little bit more white. And what I'm going to do now is cut out some areas where there's separation between the clouds. A lot of times you can see underneath the clouds, and you can see into the distance. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm creating a little bit of separation underneath the cloud. And then up top, we're going to highlight. We're going to have our light source come left to right here. So I'm going to basically highlight a little bit more towards the left, but that doesn't necessarily mean that when the light source is left to right, that doesn't necessarily mean that every part of your cloud will be highlighted on the left. Clouds have a lot of different variation in shape, and they cast shadows. So you want to try to just kind of cut out different shapes throughout your cloud, and then maybe at the end really emphasize the brightness on the left. So you can see here, cutting out contours. Leaving little bits of dark. I'm trying to create a darker cloud up in the foreground. So the key here with these clouds is to give yourself a lot of room to go brighter. You want to start out with a value that's a little bit lighter than what you started with. So your base color for your clouds, you want to go a little bit lighter than that. And as you add contours and highlights, you want to go slightly lighter each time, but you don't want to go drastically lighter. If you go drastically lighter, if you go to pure white, what happens is you flatten the clouds completely and they no longer have any shape or volume. White is a very flat color, so you want to try to avoid going pure white. Okay, now I'm going with my raw umber and cerulean blue. I almost would have called it ultramarine blue, but we're going raw umber, cerulean blue, and we're going to create a tree line. So I've got a flat brush, and I'm basically creating just some random shapes going along the top. So you want some peaks and valleys within your tree line, but it doesn't have to be super detailed. Now I'm going to set up just an idea of what my field is going to look like. I'll end up painting over all of this, but I'm giving myself a little bit of perspective. So this 1-point perspective, you can see the lines widen up as they come closer to you if you're looking at rows in a field. They also kind of go back towards the same point. They don't meet that same point, not necessarily, but they kind of all go back towards the same point. So you want wideness as you come forward, and each line kind of reaching back towards that similar point. Okay, so I'm going to use some cerulean blue and violet, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to block in this entire field with this purple color. And you can see I'm doing little dabbing motions because I want to try to get that very top part that's right below that tree line. I want to get that top part nice and flat. I don't want it to be hilly. I want the field to look flat. So I'm just slowly working along that edge, trying to make sure that I'm staying on a flat line. You could use tape for that if you wanted to. And then I'm just filling in down below. Okay, so you can see I've painted over my entire field. I kind of painted over those rows. You can kind of see them a little bit through the purple, and that kind of helps a little bit too. But basically I want to get this, I want to have a nice layer of paint here in the foreground. Okay, I'm going to take some cerulean blue, a little bit of my raw umber, and I'm going to do another layer over my trees, and you can see I'm going to hold my brush vertical now, and you can create little pine trees, you can put a little more pressure on the brush to create maple or poplar tree shapes. You just want to have a lot of variation and get that line of trees nice and solid. You don't want to be able to see through it. So just hold your brush, hold it vertical sometimes for some pine trees, push a little bit harder to create some volume on certain trees. Just try to get some variety. Overall, in general, when you look at a tree line off in the distance, in general, most of the trees are similar height. They form kind of a unique mass that has a similar height. There are trees that are taller, but overall, there will be a general average of height in the tree. So try to not make it too crazy where you have one tree super tall and one tree super short, because that will mess with your perspective a little bit. Okay, I'm going to take some cad yellow, mix that in with the tree color I just was working with, and a little bit of white. I'm going to go some more cerulean blue because I want it to be a nice cool green. And what I'm going to do now is, with my flat brush, I'm going to tap and fill in, kind of zigzagging as I go over the hill. Remember, our light source is left to right. And I'm going to zigzag over the hill a little bit, leave little bits of that gray showing just to create some atmosphere, but I'm going to fill in most of the hill. As I work closer down to the trees, I kind of just scrub the color on a little bit so it's nice and thin, so that way you can see through it and you get some of that gray peeking through, and again, that creates some atmosphere. If you accidentally overlap your tree line a little bit, that's okay. You can come back and fix that up a little bit later. Okay, next I want to add some brighter highlights, so I'm going a little bit more yellow, cad yellow, a little bit of white. And now I'm really focused in that my light source is left to right. So I'm thinking about these little ridges that come out from the hills. Hills aren't flat. They have lots of little ridges, and they're very almost like pyramid shaped in a way. So there's volume to them. So I'm thinking about those ridges, starting with a ridge and then highlighting. I'm dispersing the highlights a little bit as I get further away from the light source and concentrating the highlight on the ridge closer to the light source. So what that does is it defines the ridge that's kind of sticking out towards us, and then creates the sense that there is shadow being cast to the right. So I'll do that again here on the left. We'll highlight this ridge that's out in front, and then kind of disperse the highlights as I go to the right. Okay, next I'm going to poke in these rows again. So I'm going to take some raw umber and maybe just a tiny bit of white, but mostly just raw umber. And I'm reestablishing the rows between the lavender. So again, the lines kind of go back to this central point and widen up as we get closer. So what I like to do is just kind of pick a point on the canvas and kind of go back towards that point, putting a little more pressure on the brush as I come towards myself, and try to space the lines pretty evenly. As the lines get further away from that central point, they start getting a little bit closer together. Okay, I'm going to take some of my violet and a little bit of cerulean blue and some white. I've got my flat brush, and now I'm going to tap some highlights. So a lot of times these lavender fields, they're kind of these rounded rows that go back. So what I'm going to do is round my brush stroke as I go back. So tapping, you can see rounding over again, and then making it smaller and smaller as I get further away. Then as I get further to the right, the rows kind of come together and there's not a whole lot of spacing between them. So you kind of just have to imply that there's rows as they are painted together. Eventually you don't have to tap anymore. You can just kind of brush in some color, but try to keep those directional brush strokes going to create the rows. Okay, let's go a little bit more blue and a little bit more white. What I want to do is create the sense of light on the field in certain spots. So again, I'm going to tap, making that rounded shape, but I'm not going to go all the way back this time. Okay, if you feel like it might be a little bit too white, I kind of thought it was maybe a little too white there, so I'm going back and going over another layer with a little bit more of that violet color, a little bit more pure violet with less blue. And what that does is it saturates it a little bit more. All right, so let's take that violet color now, no more blue, a little bit of white, and now I'm being a little bit more deliberate to try to create some textures, maybe almost like there's blossoms on the rows, and you can see I'm highlighting a little bit more towards that light source. What I want to try to do is create the sense of maybe a little bit of a shadow hanging over the field. So I'm not going to highlight all the way back. I'm going to kind of concentrate in on this front area to create the sense of a shadow being cast by maybe a cloud that's passing over. So as I highlight these rows going to the side, you can see I'm not going all the way back. Okay, so I'm going to highlight the actual dirt between the rows. I'm taking raw umber and white and just a small pointed round brush. And you have to remember that there's shadows being cast to the right. So you don't want to bring the highlights all the way up to the left. You want to leave a little bit of a shadow there. Okay, I'm going to go back into my violet and some white and emphasize that highlight area again out front here on the rows, trying to create that sense of light, just hitting the front parts of the rows and then maybe a cloud casting a shadow over the back portion of the field. All right, so now I'm going with some zinc white. So zinc white is a transparent color. I'm using pure zinc white, and I'm highlighting out towards my light source on my clouds. But what will happen as it dries is it becomes a little bit more translucent, and the shadows underneath will show through. So that's how I avoid flattening out my clouds with pure white, is I try to use zinc white for the most part. If you want to create some new contours, you can do that as well. But I'm going to really try to emphasize some of these areas of brightness in the cloud out towards my light source. And underneath the cloud as well, there's, like I said before, you can kind of see underneath the cloud sometimes. So you want to emphasize some of those highlights underneath the clouds as well as the top edges. Okay, and then maybe some more dramatic highlights on the field up here in the foreground. Trying to keep those rounded shapes a little bit more on the left. And maybe as we go to the right, the shadows, the clouds kind of covering part of the right-hand side of the field as well. So we won't carry the bright highlights all the way to the right. Kind of creates a cool highlighted focal point. Okay, I'm going to add some highlights to the tree line. So again, light sources left to right, using some yellow ochre and just a little bit of cerulean blue. Highlighting some of these shapes that I created earlier out to the left, and then just dispersing the color a little bit down to the right. It's a very impressionistic approach. So up on the hill, we're going to do the same thing. Some cad yellow, some white, cerulean blue, and we're going to emphasize some of the highlights. You want to keep this color a lot more on the blue scale, so that way it recedes into the background a little bit. So highlighting again towards our light source, focusing on ridges, and then leaving shadows to the right. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that painting lesson. Like I said, I took you through the major parts of the painting. It's a great lesson to do because it creates lots of contrast, light and shadow, and it has that really nice one-point perspective. So don't forget to check out my website, timgagnon.com, for online painting lessons from me and from other great artists. If you have any questions, you can post them in the comments below. And thanks again for watching. Make sure you subscribe and share. I'll see you again really soon.